I'll just turn this way.
So on another note, I have been feverishly modeling a variety of scenarios associated with some of the development stuff going forward.
Right.
And for your information too, Harold and the board, Eckert, you know, I called him and told him that it didn't look good for Ford. Building his project without some booster pumps. So I have just been ripping my brains out, trying to figure out if we've really thought of everything. And I went back in and started just modeling the pumps at the building.
Mayor, can you hear
With
us?
the pump curves that we have.
Okay.
All
And
right,
as long
Jerry,
as they are on and operating.
Jerry?
reasonable manner,
can you hear
We
me?
can service them. We can maintain the fleet.
Pumps on.
I can see your lips moving, but I don't go anywhere from there.
We can service them, is the bottom line, without having to tack on a booster station. To me, booster stations are operational.
Jerry?
Yeah.
How's that?
There you go.
All right, I had it on mute.
Okay. Let's see here.
Matthew's going himself. That's a COVID there. It's not even.
Matthew, can you hear us?
That I can. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
All right, perfect.
Welcome.
Thank you.
You already in?
I am.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone to the Big Plains Water and Sewer Special Service District Board meeting. If you all stand, we'll pledge allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call. Mayor Lisenby.
Marty Lisenby here, present.
Jerry.
Hope he's back on mute.
I can't hear you, but I can see you.
Jerry, it keeps flipping off to on the
We're both doing it. I was flipping you on and you were flipping me off.
sorry.
Yeah, we'll count you.
Don't take it personal.
Hey, Matthew, present?
Hey, I'm here. Jerry Jorgensen here.
Okay. Matthew Kennedy,
Present.
present?
Ross Gregerson, present.
Harold Merrick, present?
Danny Bass, present.
Welcome one and all. We'll go to the consent agenda. We'll consider item A, B, and C, which are the board meeting minutes for January, February, and March. If we have any issues on any of them, we'll break them out separately, but I've read them all and would motion that we accept them as they are. So I'll wait until you get through them and second them.
I read them. I would second it.
We'll wait for a vote.
Oh. Aye.
Denny is aye.
Aye. Marty Lisenby.
Aye, Jerry Jorgensen.
Okay. The minutes are passed. Okay, then on March expense report, I just had some comments on that. Operating expense, that's clarification on it. Professional services for 18,000. What exactly is that, Ben?
So you're looking at the operational budget report.
Mhm.
So professional services is primarily engineering services. 18,000 includes the amount that was recently paid to RM Squared Engineering for the source protection plans.
Okay, it's kind of,
But does that come out of that account, Chairman?
well, that's where I was gonna go with the next one too.
The cash itself is reimbursable, but it still flows through your income statement.
And so that's the point I wanted to make, before we move on auditing and so on, $7,000 for auditing, is that,
That's the annual financial audit. That's what was budgeted.
we'll let that one go. So anyway, the 18,000, and then we get over to the check register. There's the black fence, which is PTIF account as well.
That's a capitalized asset, so it flowed through the balance sheet.
So it'll be reimbursed for
It'll be
those two
reimbursed,
items.
yep.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions on the March expense report or the March operational budget report?
I have one question as far as the impact fees goes. If we forecasted for impact fees of 2020 for 234,000, we're only at 48.
You're kind of ahead of me here.
Oh, okay, well,
That's correct, yep. So the total budgeted non-operating revenue of impact fee income was $234,000 for the year, and year to date, we've collected just under $50,000.
so we're way behind as far as that goes.
Right,
And we're estimating for 2021, 341.
yeah, I think we'll get to that later in the agenda, but yeah.
Okay. So back to the March, I motion that we accept the expense report and the operational budget report. Do I have a second?
Second.
Vote?
Ralph Gregerson, aye.
Marty Lisenby, aye.
Jerry Jorgensen, aye.
Any Bass, aye.
Okay. Taking care of that. Staff reports, Dale Harris can tell us what's going on in the world after.
I've almost got all of the meter cans and all three systems inspected and the valves exercised. Right now, I've been cleaning out the valve boxes in Cedar Point that yearly because of all the sediment and dirt gets in there. So I think that we can be able to get into them when we need to. Had a hydrant install that we did for Alchemist. We finally got our welcome to the club letter from the state after 2 years for Canaan. It gives us our sampling schedule for Canaan. And that finally happened. They'd sent me, I think it was 3 of them almost in a row of violations for Canaan that were supposed to be under this welcome to the club letter. So I got those taken care of. Those were instantly erased and we got an apology and an email from them. But then we finally got our welcome to the club letter. So that gives us what our sampling schedule. They'd sent me violations for not sampling on a sampling schedule that I didn't even have yet. And so it was their mistake. They blamed it on COVID and people not being able to go from office to office. But anyways, we finally got the welcome to the club letter. And so we'll have nitrates, nitrites, the VOCs, what else was on there, Ben? Pesticides. That'll be part of the budget because we got about 20, we've got a good sampling. Had a couple of complaints for air over in Canaan. So I flushed that out over there. The in hydrant got that going. The clarity for 59, just runoff has come is what I'm contributing to. But the other day I had to run that 59 to waste for about 45 minutes. It was to the tune of like 11,000 gallons before I could actually put it into the system over there. And then
Dale, where's that 11,000 gallons going?
into the ditch.
Out on the ground?
Well, it goes into the ditch. Part of the thing that Shapley that we share that property with, he dug us a ditch that goes all the way out and then dumps into that wash that's there on 1700 East. So that just goes out and dumps into the wash.
No way we can save that for irrigation or anything like that for the guys out there?
With cost, I mean, you can put it in, it's all that iron algae. I wouldn't be putting it on any of my vegetables or spraying it on anything. That's how come I can't put it into the system. It's that red water that happens. I've gone through and flushed all of the hydrants, exercise the valves, make sure that those are operating. And then some other things that I'll get to later on in the agenda. That's all I got for now.
Okay, thank you, Dale. Glad to have Rod Mills, the district engineer, with us. And perhaps you could share the current events with what's going on, as well as with the EWAC grant.
Thank you. So as far as district activities, we are still working on water rights and trying to get a few loose ends resolved relating to get all of the documentation up to date, in the right location, at the right point of diversion, located correctly on the maps. So that's an ongoing thing. We'll be talking about that as we go forward. It's really important, and it's really high on our list to make sure that those water rights are secured and all the paperwork is in place with the state for that. And there have been some issues to resolve there. One in particular is the transfer of water rights from the bank. Some of the water rights that were actually pre-allocated by virtue of sale of the system to the Plains. Some of those rights went back and forth in the bank agreements, and so that there's some reconciliation that needs to be made there. Turns out it's really only 6 acre feet, but every acre foot is precious. We go forward, and so that's just one example of some of the things that are happening. There's some mislocated water rights that just require a little bit of paperwork with the state to clean up. We do need to transfer some additional water rights into the Cook well. So that's something that's just relatively new as far as water rights. We don't currently have any active water rights in the Cook well. So we need to transfer just a few rights as the backup to that portion of the system to have paper backup for the wet water that we may extract from that portion. It's not super critical, but it's part of the paperwork challenge, and it really does clean things up and helps everybody understand what water rights are allocated and which ones. Of course, as we all know, Cook and Well 51 are close enough proximity, you kind of just lump them all together. But from a paper perspective, it's just cleaner to have allocated water rights. So there's a couple of examples of what water rights. We have assisted in several development discussions. We have looked at the Kaiser development from the perspective of how much water demand will be coming if that plan is approved through you as a board and through the town. We've run the equivalent residential connection calculations for that system and are prepared to actually make some kind of a report to the developer to assist in their performance in terms of what amount of impact fees will be associated with that based on the equivalent residential connection, and what additional be needed for their system, including the possibility of some credits for infrastructure that they may need to build on. So that one, we've had a pretty good crack at that one. We've also just recently looked at some property directly across the street from the Cedar Point subdivision. Some folks are looking for that for potential purchase. So we've run some quick calculations.
If I'm missing a paper.
How much of a mainline extension they need may need to be provided there. We had some discussion about how that process works in terms of who pays for it and all of that stuff. Um, some of those answers are never super exciting for the developers at hand because they'll fund a fair amount of the cost of those things as they need fire protection and water service combined for some of that. So we shared the information with those folks. Done a few other minor little things, but just development inquiries through the district. One really jumped into the model and updated it again to what the system will do if we were to add the Eckert pipeline that has already been designed and is in Troy Eckert's hands. And he's just trying to evaluate his costs as well to determine whether he can really do the project that he's thinking about financially. Initially, we thought that was going to require a booster station based on some of our initial modeling, and we got some hardline field data from Dale that was helpful in calibrating the model. We've since really put our heads together and figured out an operational scenario where we can provide fire protection for that system in addition to maintaining reasonable water pressure for just normal service without a booster pump. And to me, that may not sound like a lot to anybody in the room other than me, maybe Dale, but their booster pumps are great. They're important when they're absolutely needed, but they are just another mechanical system on a system that you would prefer works from Mother Nature and so forth. And so the fewer of those kinds of systems that we have to build into our water system overall, the easier it is for our operations to keep up with it, and the better it is overall. So I consider that really good news. We have not really shared that information with Troy yet, and I haven't finalized my report, but it's looking like we can finalize that in the next day or two and get some information out to him. And then really it goes back to him in terms of, does he want to get into the town's process and get the overall evaluation and the formality of the planning portion of the stuff going forward. And we'll of course track that along with the water district as well. So in short, it'll be in his hands very shortly again. And at some level we'll hear back from them in terms of what they would like to do.
Now that'll still be a 12-inch line.
Yeah, and the model, thank you for that level of detail. That was a little ways out of the front of my head on that one. We did confirm that it absolutely needs to continue as a 12-inch line. So maybe there is some additional conversation that needs to take place in terms of cost share or whatever. But that's really a board issue. What I've determined technically is we have to have a 12-inch line to service that.
Now with the tank from Gooseberry Preserve, does that play into this model?
It does. So we have modeled it because of the kind of situation we're in terms of the Gooseberry project isn't done yet. It isn't built, but it seems imminent in some respects. So we've modeled it both ways, I guess is the long and short of it. I needed some assurance if the Gooseberry project were to never happen and they were to pull up stakes and disappear, can I still operate the system with the Eckert addition and some of the other things? And the answer to that is yes. We've done the models in the various scenarios, and for Eckert at least, it looks good. There will come a time fairly quickly that we'll be talking about additional source with other developers if the Gooseberry project doesn't come online. That tank really is going to help us. And this is in the weeds a little bit, but since you asked, the pipeline that we have requested and is in part of the development agreement with our district that comes down from the tanks and essentially connects on the backside of the original Apple Valley and head is really helpful. That actually represents, for the system, for that entire system, an additional loop.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely amazing how much that helps the fire flows, and just the overall operations of the system, even within the existing system. So from my perspective, and what infrastructure has been negotiated in the development agreement, those pieces of infrastructure could really help us moving forward. So I'm hoping that they continue to move forward. And I have had some interaction with those folks, and just recently spoke to the guys that are developing and designing the required booster station on their end, and there's no way around that. And they're still continuing with their design. So as best to my knowledge, I think they're moving forward. I don't know exactly what their intended schedule is at this point, but I am in conversation with their engineering folks and the design people on various aspects of how that relates to our system.
If you don't think it would be inappropriate, if you could ask them if they have a timeline on putting that pipeline in.
Okay.
Because it feeds directly into our maneuvering to get our bills paid.
Yeah, I hear you there.
And so if we could have an assurance that that is on the horizon for this summer, it would be.
Yeah, in the course of just discussions, I can absolutely get a little better.
Yeah.
Looks like Marty has a
What their internal schedule is.
Right, yeah. Okay, that
Looks like Marty has a comment on that.
Marty?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that we haven't even had any kind of discussion what they want to do with that property other than a cursory thing. They might like to do an RV park. They might want to put some homes, but they have not come to the town for any kind of zoning. They haven't seen any drawings. So I know obviously if they're coming this far as engineering and everything goes, they got to be pretty serious. But it's concerning to me that they haven't done anything for the town as far as any conversation. Just so you know.
Yeah, that surprises me actually.
I thought they were.
But that's really good information.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, because I thought it was going ahead on that end as well.
Yeah, I thought they were tracking with the town.
Okay.
Are we talking about two different projects?
We're talking about Gooseberry.
Are we talking about the Gooseberry Preserve?
I was talking about the Eckerts.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, I feel better already. Thank you.
My apologies, but also on the Gooseberry Mesa project, they've got to, as you know, they've got to do all the engineering and then just bring in a.
You can watch TV and stuff. I can't hear you.
We need to mute Jerry there because he's. Anyway, so on the Gooseberry Mesa project, they've got a preliminary plat and a final plat, and we haven't seen either of those, along with the engineering and reviews. But that could come together. I understand they're doing engineering, so.
Oh, okay. So that clarifies that one. But
Okay.
yeah, I would concur that I don't think, from my knowledge, I speak to Troy only when I have a report, and I have not seen anything coming back from him at all. And the last time I spoke with him was with several of you folks, just trying to get a handle on, is everybody on the same page, and what's that been? A month, roughly?
Yeah, I don't think Eckert's firmed up anything on the other end.
No, I think he's still, frankly, kind of doing due diligence, just trying to figure out where he's at. And this information, of course, is helpful in that regard. So I can see why that may be ahead of some of the formal process. That doesn't sound as scary as what I thought we were talking about.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I can move directly on to 3 if you like.
Rob, can I ask you a quick question? When you mentioned there weren't any water rights in the Cook well, are there any water rights in that other well that's inoperative there?
Yes.
Do you know?
Yes.
Can we just move those over?
That's kind of my plan.
Okay.
Yeah, that's, again, thanks for the questions. I don't know how deep to get into the weeds on some of this stuff. Yeah, what I'm thinking, there is some water rights in the Jessup well pad, there are water rights through a change application that needs to be revisited, actually. And then, yes, I think what I would like to do is just move some of those rights into the Cook wellhead. Yeah.
And to cut to the chase here, we've got to get that Cook well going.
Yeah.
But we don't have the funds released as yet.
Right.
For the construction part or the repart.
Right, so I have taken the information that you guys have provided me, the bidding information. I spoke with the Division of Drinking Water at some length just a couple of days ago, earlier this week, and got some specific instructions as to how to move forward. I have one little bit of financial information that Ben and I have to share that I need to add to that letter, and then I'll be sending a request letter to the Division of Drinking Water.
And we might want to Monday or maybe after this meeting, discuss a few things that don't really need to be in the fluff of this meeting. So, so great. Rod, anything else on that before we move to item 3?
I think so.
Okay, I'm looking forward to this. Discussion and action. Item 3, USDA RD water project update.
Okay, well, thank you. So they are in receipt of the documentation to trigger the obligation of funds. They've been querying us almost daily about various aspects of the development of the project. We got I don't know, I want to say a 30 or 40, and I'm breaking out in a smile because it's government work, as you know. About a 30, 40 line item. These are the requirements of the documentation that we'll be reviewing. So it's all like we talked about in the engineering agreement, all of these government forms to fill out, and a particular way to do the bid document, and a particular way to do the construction specifications, and a specific way to reference this document to that document. And there's enough stuff to make your head spin. However, we've done this before, so it's not unexpected. But we're pretty deep into that process. We've got a number of the documentation requirements put together already. The really biggie one that is only one line item in there, 40 pages of line items, is the construction document. So surveying has been put together. The site mapping has been completed. The basic layouts are done. Some of the details are already established in terms of putting forward how the rehabilitation will look. And what contractors will be bidding on. So we are well along in the hopes that we can get our documentation completed and ready to submit to the government by about this time next month. That may be really overly optimistic, knowing what's ahead of us in terms of all of this documentation. But we're pushing really hard because every day it feels like the temperature's going up 1 degree. And we just need to get on with it. So it's a very high priority, and a lot of progress is being made. There are some specific issues that we're working through the government with on the second half of the grant, which is the water pipe portion. That portion of piping will actually tie the two springs that are currently operational back together, like it's currently running, but with a much higher performing pipeline system. And so there are some technical issues to work out there, just in terms of flow rates, and just some of the techie engineering crap that has to be worked through. That sounded really good, didn't it? Techie engineering crap. I should do better with that. So it's just a matter of figuring out flows and what the potentials are there, and making sure that we're sizing the piping correctly and some of those kinds of things. So working in detail on all of that stuff to get that put together quickly. I think our plan, and certainly for the board to just consider, because really at the end of the day, it's USDA's review that will count the most, but I would think we might want to throw those documents and that information in front of you guys and share out kind of what the thinking is related to how the project will go forward and put that out there concurrent with their review. By contract, they have a number of days to do their review. And every day that we converse with each other, the last thing I say is, and remember, we need this in a hurry. And they're hearing that, and I think they'll do their best. But I'm not holding out any superhero type hopes that they're really going to knock it out really, really fast. And by really, really fast, that would be a couple of weeks. I think it's going to be sitting on their desks for another 30 days after we get it all in. I'm hoping not, but I'm fearing that that's probably what.
Okay, have it ready by the first of June to submit. It's submitted in June, runs through June, the 1st of July, they turn it out as a product. Then we can let it go for bid in August.
We're gonna miss.
It seems to me like
Right.
summer's.
We're gonna miss it. And I think that's really the reality of it. There's a good aspect to that in the sense that the flows will be down a little bit once we start digging and stuff. But I think all of our efforts to try to get this online for this summer really may not happen. It just depending on how long they take with the reviews and some of the other stuff, and really how we've talked about letting us prepare the bid documents subject to their review and getting the advertising and some of that stuff done. So there are ways to kind of trim the timeframes down a little bit, but we're just going to need a buttload of cooperation from them to make all that happen. And they're dealing with diminished staff and obviously the same problems that all of us are dealing with in terms of work efficiency. So we're going to do the best we can, I think, is what's going on there. But I'm super excited to get that project underway. I think this is another one of those projects that represents for me the reason why I'm in engineering in the first place. Because I think we're going to redevelop the spring. I'm anticipating that we will have significantly better flows coming out of that area and a lot less risk of the very incident that took the spring out. We'll do enough capture work that we won't be liquefying the sands around about the collection system, ad nauseum. I mean, as the runoff from the spring. So I think it's going to be a super, super valuable project for our community for way, way beyond the timeframes that I'll ever be around to even think more about it. So I'm really, from that perspective, I'm really, really juiced about getting that project on track and getting something really cool done.
Question, we're looking at, I don't know where this number came from, but it's in the USDA document indicating that the approximate flow to Canaan Estates is 369,000 gallons per month. That's about a third of what we need there. And so we had better write some letters and go knock some doors and let people know what's going to happen here, because if the one guy uses 100,000 gallons a month.
Oh, it's more than that. Brian Cox uses 400,000 to 500,000 gallons in a month.
So one guy's using more than we can pipe down there right now, according to this.
Yeah, that's not even.
I don't think it's accurate.
No, it's not even accurate. I mean,
And I don't know where that number is coming from, actually, but I have heard some fairly low numbers coming out of whatever projections people are making as they evaluate this project.
Water screaming out of there right now, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, yesterday morning was the first morning in a couple of months. Well, actually, since the end of last season, that I didn't have water overflowing into the pond. But Kurt is now firing up for cattle. He's starting to water.
Yeah.
So he's starting to take more water up above. So I cracked our valve a little bit more to keep that overflow. But we need to remember that, I mean, that number's completely wrong. Kurt's taking his water out of that line before it even gets to our tank. That's why doing stuff in the summer with this thing,
It's precarious.
well, it's precarious for what we're usage, but we also got a guy that last year, you remember, we didn't have water. He lost trees, he lost grass, and Kurt's been very patient with us, and I don't want to stretch that out with him. And I just think that, man, we plugged that 3-inch line with us replacing stuff up there in the middle of the summer. You
Well,
guys,
let's do this, Dale, if you would keep an extra close eye on that tank and the overflow into the pond. And if you see things drip going down and we
oh, I would definitely, yeah,
can't recover it
you would know
now,
as soon as I did.
yeah, we'll get the word across the street and try to pull it back before we
Most
start
definitely.
blowing air out of there.
Yeah, I won't let us get into, you'll know as soon as I do.
All right. So it's a done deal, right, Rod?
It's rolling.
Yeah, okay. Appreciate that. It's taking a little longer, but if, the good thing is that the service district was able to do it. If it was still in private hands, it'd be gone Goslin. They wouldn't be
I don't know
able to
what they
afford
would
to
do
do
because
this.
they were a private system. They wouldn't have access to the money that so yeah, it'd be.
Any more comments on Springs?
No, I'm good.
All right, we'll move on to item 4. Thanks for your patience, Matt. We'll turn the time over to Matt Kennedy for his comments.
Great, thanks. So I'll go ahead here and share my screen if that works for everybody.
Okay.
Let me get this pulled up.
Nice spot.
Nice, like the screen.
Thanks. Yeah, that was my dog last fall, I think it was, up in the Uintas. Great. Well, thanks again for being flexible here. I know with everything been going on the last couple months, I'm glad we're still able to do these presentations over a digital platform here. So just to make sure everyone can see my presentation, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Great. So again, my name's Matt Kennedy with RCAC. We're the Rural Community Assistance Corporation. And so we're a nonprofit entity that works with rural communities throughout Utah and the Western US mostly on their water and wastewater systems is my focus. And we do a variety of things, technical, managerial, and financial. Some of you might remember me a few years ago knocking on your door and asking how much money you make when we were working with, at that time, Rick Mosier and Robert Campbell on a median household income survey in order to help Apple Valley here best qualify for grants and loans with different funders. But on the financial side, we do a lot of rate studies. And so, I've been working closely with Ben and Dale over the last few months here to take a deep dive into the system's financials, water sales, asset replacement, and current, debt requirements to figure out where you guys are at today and really where we need to look to move in the future to, stay solvent, prepare for asset replacement, and continue to comply with these loan conditions. So, as you're all aware, if your rates aren't high enough, you're not going to be able to pay back your loans. You're going to have to draw down your existing reserves, and eventually those reserves will run dry and you won't be able to pay your bills. And not fully funding your system can also lead to violations on the compliance side as well. If you're not able to pay Dale, you're not going to get those water samples taken. So you want to make sure that you're bringing in revenue sufficient to keep the system running completely. And as a board, you know, really having that fiduciary responsibility to keep the system running not only in the short term, but also making sure that in the long run, the system is maintained and future generations inherit a system that they can afford and will run effectively for them. So when RCAC does a rate study here, we look at kind of 3 guiding principles. One, that the rates we recommend are sustainable, that you're bringing in revenue sufficient to keep your system running. The rates we recommend are equitable. We don't want any one customer group subsidizing another, and that they're justifiable. And justifiable really means that we're not making things up. These are based on your system's numbers and based on industry standards. And so the model we use is based on AWWA, or American Water Works Association standards. A lot of them are pulled from the M1 and M54 manuals, if you happen to have an AWWA library in your office there. RCAC pulls this information and plugs it into our model. We review it with staff, both internal RCAC staff to kind of have a quality check and make sure that we're not missing anything, and then also with the district staff. So at one point, Ben, Dale, and I kind of sat down and walked through the asset inventory. Just this week, Ben and Marty and I sat down and reviewed things again to make sure that numbers were accurate. And so really when we're looking at the overall picture of this rate model, you know, we start with a few things up there in yellow. So we start with your system assets, which Rod was able to pull together and that we reviewed with Ben and Dale. The budget, looking at the 2019 approved budget, there's a few areas that we've made some small adjustments, like the impact fees. We are, you know, projecting out a lower impact fee revenue just because we have seen this year that it wasn't as high as originally projected. And then sales. So we take 12 months of water usage data for every customer in the district in order to help us kind of forecast that revenue. So from those, you know, kind of big 3 components, you know, we figure out what are your reserve requirements. We adjust that budget for inflation, and we figure out what those fixed and variable costs are going to be to help us determine an appropriate base rate and usage rate. And then also include kind of conservation and growth factors to adjust that sales forecast, all of which gets us to a 5-year forecasted budget that we kind of rotate back through, you know, adjust those base rate and usage rates until we find a 5-year budget that balances out and really works for your system. So any questions so far before I get into the actual numbers here?
No?
All right. And actually, I did forget to mention earlier, just to back up a little bit about RCAC. So RCAC, we're a technical assistance provider. So we provide these services free to communities. And we have a variety of funders, but the funder today that's been supporting the work that we're doing on this rate analysis has been USDA Rural Development. So we have a contract with them that allows us to do this work at no cost to the communities.
Is that your advertisement blurb? It's
Yeah, yep. I
30 seconds of
normally remember to throw that in early on, but we already discussed USDA so much today, I kind of forgot.
They're our best friends these days.
Yeah, so that's kind of an overview of the model, and now getting into the actual numbers here. So the first reserve that we're looking at is your debt service reserve. Oh, looks like we might have drawing tools going on here. So the debt reserve target, that's really determined by your existing loans. You have several loans out right now and bonds, whether they're through USDA Rural Development or the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. And each of those different loans comes with the conditions of a debt reserve target that has to be met. Typically, this is going to be one, you know, I'm going to see if I can. Ben, are you able to turn off drawing tools? I'm not sure where these marks are coming from.
I think that's on your end.
Interesting. I'm not touching anything and they're still showing up. Give me just a moment here to see if I can adjust that.
You know, they're yellow. They're not too distracting for us.
Okay. Well, I'll leave them here. Oh, sorry, I'm not used to Zoom yet. Losing my controls a little. So we'll leave those marks for now and we'll adjust those later. So the debt reserve target again is established by those the terms of those loans, and they're generally equal to one annual payment, and you can build those up over 10 years. So the eventual target that you'll need to meet is $238,180. There might be a little bit of variability there, but that's based on the average annual payments that you have for these loans. With the kind of 10% allocation annually in mind, where you need to be today is $116,204, which you do have available in terms of your restricted and unrestricted accounts. The operating reserve, that target there is really 1.5 times the O&M expenses in your billing cycle. And that's really to make sure that if you're, say, in a pandemic, people aren't able to afford their water bills one month, it gives you that buffer to make sure that you can access, the funds you need to keep running. And so that's the calculated target there is at 19,480. With looking at the end of year 2019 balance sheet, the system had about $138,000 available between all the accounts. And so the amount available from that unrestricted cash in the checking account was then allocated to this operating reserve. The next reserve here, that emergency reserve, is something that we determined with Ben and Dale. Typically it's looking at what is the replacement cost of your most critical asset in your water system. If one thing was to go down, you wouldn't be able to provide water. Or what has historical cost, or what have costs been in the past as it relates to responding to an emergency. And we determined that $18,000 was an appropriate amount. With that much available during an emergency, the system can respond to most things, short of catastrophes. And then the last reserve here, which is typically one of the bigger ones, is a capital replacement reserve. So we don't necessarily look at, say, funding depreciation, which is funding the purchase price of an asset over a given period. We look at it a little bit differently, which we're going to get into in the next couple slides here. But that existing reserve of $1,177, really what that's coming from is the remaining cash available less the debt reserve and operating allocation. All right. Great. So, sorry, I was still trying to figure out where these lines are coming from, but no luck there right now. So the capital replacement reserve, that's based on the current evaluation of the asset and not depreciation. So we'll talk about the math in a minute here, but in keeping in mind as we talk about the capital replacement reserve allocations, the loan agreements that you have include certain allocations that are needed. USDA Rural Development requires that at least $6,667 is contributed to this short-lived asset reserve annually in order to cover replacement costs of short-lived assets. And then State Revolving Fund in those loan agreements requires that 5% of your O&M expenses be set aside into a capital facilities reserve. So, these are required by your funders, and we'll look at how we can calculate those. So when we inventory all the assets, we take out any that aren't going to be replaced. And those that are left, we talk about we look at when are they going to be replaced, how much is it going to cost to replace in the future, and how can the system pay for it? If you've got say a 2 million gallon storage tank today, that might cost $2.5 million to replace in the future. Big Plains isn't going to be able to pay $2.5 million in cash to replace that tank when it's time. So we look at, well, maybe the system can afford 2 or 5% cash, and the rest will look at loan and grant to fund that replacement. And so here's just kind of an example. So as we look at, say, the 8-inch PVC up on the top line there, and I apologize if it's small on your screen, we know that that was acquired in 2014 and has an expected lifespan of about 75 years. So from 2014, that means we have about 69 years remaining on the life of that asset. And when we account for inflation, that replacement cost will likely be 3.7 million. That's something that the system can't afford all in cash. And so we're looking at just a 2% cash contribution for the replacement of that large asset. However, if you look down at the, say, the well pump number 1, you know, that one, just the pump itself is a lower cost. So maybe about 30,000 for that replacement cost, depending on the size of the pump. And so 20% of that replacement cost can be funded by cash. And so from that, we are able to kind of figure out what these annual reserve contributions should be to fund that cash component. So when we look at all of that, really we're looking at contributing about $23,000 a year to capital replacement. These are just looking at your existing assets. As we were compiling this inventory, there wasn't really too many planned projects outside of the ECWAG funded project. And so this is something that, you know, is a living document, and, you know, we'll send you a copy of this capital improvement plan to maintain, but it'll likely need to be adjusted once the ECWAG funding is finalized and the scope of that project is fully determined. Because with that, we'll look at what components of Canaan Springs are being replaced now and kind of readjust their expected lifespan, the replacement costs, and how much the system needs to set aside for those. All right, so moving on to the budget here.
Matt, can I make a comment here?
Yes.
So when you say you come up with these costs, what is your experience like when you say that pump's $30,000? I was in the business, it's not $30,000. So why didn't we go back to our previous expenses when that well pump was replaced and say, yeah, we spent 7,000 or whatever it was in actual, rather than you guys throw out these numbers that seem kind of high to me?
Yeah, so what these numbers are based on are, we utilize an asset evaluation tool, or an asset valuation tool from the Environmental Finance Center out of the University of New Mexico to determine what the average current costs are for a lot of these system assets. And so for a lot of this information, we didn't necessarily have the historic cost. We didn't have those records. And so we're estimating the current cost of that asset given, you know, industry standards.
Yeah, well, that's real high. And I guess my other question is, why didn't you involve the chairman in this, that know and been here day in and day out, you know, when these costs occur, that we could give more realistic pricing? If you're coming with numbers, let's have some good numbers, not something that's general.
I don't think we should downplay Matt's work here. I mean, I know that a lot of the work that the district has done, it's been on a volunteer basis. Moving into the future, I don't know that the district can plan on that in the future, that you guys are down in the dirt doing the work. I mean, a lot of this work, you have to rely on some of these numbers that are national numbers, right? Am I wrong with that?
Well, you're wrong. I mean, all I'm saying is when he threw that number out, it just put a red flag on me. Are all the numbers like that if you're using this annual average? Because we're not New York, we're not, I mean, I don't know, Dale, how much is our pump over there, well number 1? 7,000, 8,000?
Yeah, well, when we replaced the last one for well number 1, that was pump and motor. The last time we did that, we were around 12 grand.
12, yeah. So I mean, I'm not trying to be contentious. I just want to know if the numbers we're looking at are realistic for us. then that's my only comment. Okay, let's move on then.
Yeah, and again, this is something that we can go back and readdress. So if you do have more up-to-date numbers on this, we can go back and make those changes here. Because again, this is trying to fill in the gaps for knowledge that we didn't have when we were discussing it. So we just use the tools out there that we're able to use.
And you also mentioned that Harold wasn't involved, the chairman wasn't involved. Dale and I we worked through the assets. We looked at the system asset inventory. We talked about these costs. This wasn't just Matt throwing these numbers out. So this has been a team effort with the staff of the district. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I think the only concern that I'd have on this is that if things are a little more pricey on the study than they are in real life, that we're gonna end up with a percentage off of Matt's numbers that's gonna be way higher than us. But if we're working off a percentage, we can still come back down to where our cost factors are at and feed that same percentage in and come up with a different number that is more at home for us. So I think in theory, we're tracking here, but they are pretty good. A little different. Maybe you ought to charge more when you're business. Okay, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, not a problem. Yeah, and so that's, yeah, thanks, Ben, too. That's how we determine those current costs. And then we also incorporate inflation in order to look at that estimated future cost, which we just updated about a month ago to 2.3%. That's the current kind of 5-year inflation factor that's being projected now. It was 2.9, but we've reduced that down to the current recommendations. And so again, this is still a living document. And so we can go back and make some corrections there to those existing assets. I'll send that whole file over to Ben here, and you're more than welcome to review and put your comments in there. And then with the Canaan Springs system as well, with the current engineering that's been done there, we can make sure that those numbers are updated as well. So moving on from that onto the budget here. So this is again based on the 2019 budget. For the 5-year projections, we do adjust based on an inflation factor, again, 2.3%. We look at those reserve requirements, and we also include those other revenue streams outside of sales. So impact fees, connection fees, interest income, those items that are found on your budget. And then in order to figure out what a base rate should be, we look at fixed cost. These are ones that don't change with the volume of water sold. So that's a lot of personnel costs, insurance, and debt service requirements. Things that whether you're producing, a gallon of water a month or 1 million gallons of water a month, these don't really change. And that's about 94% of your system's cost. And a lot of that can really be tied back to those debt service requirements and those debt reserve requirements. The variable costs are those ones that are really tied to how much water you're producing. So utilities, you're not spending a whole lot on electricity unless you turn your wells on. And that's about 6% of your system's budget. And really, the reason we do this is that a base rate should cover those fixed expenses, while a usage charge would cover the variable expenses here. And kind of tied into that, we're looking at, again, a conservation adjustment and community growth. So community growth, we're estimating a little high here at 2.5%, which is more growth than you might be seeing, but it's our way of capturing the future usage for those standby customers that will be, converting over to a normal, say, residential customer. It's a way we can kind of capture that additional water usage in the model, and therefore capture that revenue as well. The conservation factor, we're not really putting in much of a conservation factor right now because we're not making any recommendations to changing your usage rates. So we don't expect to see a whole lot of people reducing how much water they use. However, as we have this discussion and, rate changes are looked at and, ideas are finalized, we can go back and put that in again to better reflect how your customers would react to any changes. So the base rate here, you guys are in a great position where you're already looking at base rate based on meter sizes. A lot of systems don't do that, but really it is the best way to do it. That's how AWWA recommends. And we really look at what is that water meters, potential demand on the system. So from that, we look at how many meters of each size you have, what are your total fixed cost in the water system, and then allocate those fixed costs over each individual meter to figure out if they paid that amount, we'd have all our fixed cost covered. So when we do that calculation, we see about 360 3/4-inch customers, 2 1-inch customers, and 1 1.5-inch customers. And this is based on the usage data that Ben provided to me. And so when we allocate their specific demand on the system, we find those 3/4-inch meters, they're about 98% of the system's demand. And therefore 98% of the system's fixed cost would be allocated to those 360 meters, which leads us to this far right column, which is in red, and that's that theoretical base rate. So by doing this calculation, you can see that those 3/4-inch customers, if they were paying $113 a month, then really all your fixed cost should be covered. However, we know that there's a reason we call this theoretical. It is very difficult to have all your fixed costs covered just by a base rate. And so we know that there's other revenue streams and that you will generate revenue from water sales as well. So we won't be implementing a $113 base rate for your residential customers. We're going to find something that's more affordable for them, but still brings in sufficient revenue. So any questions so far?
No, you might answer them as you go forward. We have depended heavily on impact fees. One thing I might point out is, remember you did a income survey, and the median income in Apple Valley was $41,000. And through that study, if I understood it correctly, that we were pretty much at the end of our rope as far as lending or borrowing ability, and that with the median income of 41,000, that any money that was brought in would have to be heavily subsidized by grants. And anyway, I guess the best way to put it is the town is poverty flats, and so we're trying to keep the base rate as low as we can. I thoroughly agree and discussed it with the mayor and with Ben and Dale and Rod that it'd be nice to have more money coming in, but we've been very hesitant to move the base rate because of the fact that I don't know if Dale's going to be spending all his days turning meters off and on, and where we're going to go with this. So that's my concern. Is I realize it's going to take growth in this area to get some impact fees, and we generate about 150,000 a year currently in water flow. As more meters go in, that'll go up, and hopefully it'll grow into itself. But $113 is really spooky to look at from my point of view.
Yeah.
I don't know where you go from here, but maybe you get the answer.
Yeah, and I do have two suggestions on some routes that you can take, and we do keep in mind that affordability index. So we look at what is that average monthly bill and what is that in relation to the median household income of the town. So, the first one here is just really what if we don't make any changes? What if we just continue on as business as usual? And really, the trend that the system is on is that you'll need to draw down your existing reserves and you won't bring in revenue that's adequate to cover your loan payments, your debt reserve requirements. Uh, you know, you'll bring in enough to cover operations and maintenance costs, but not really much past that. And so this table here is really projecting out. So if we have current rates moving forward, this is looking at, we've reduced that impact fee number down to about 60,000 a year in discussion that I had with Ben and Marty earlier this week. And we've also have a capital reserve fund being funded at that $20,000 a year. However, with those changes, we're looking at a loss of $150,000 a year for the next 5 years. And really after year 2, that's going to deplete your existing reserves. And so really changes, need to be made here, because this is, the rates that are currently being charged are not sustainable for annual cost on the system. And so with, no change, like I mentioned, O&M costs can be covered. However, debt service, debt reserve funding an emergency reserve, and capital reserve funding, that won't be afforded. I think Marty, you got your hand up.
Yeah, could you go back one slide?
Yeah.
So that down in towards the bottom there, 1.42, 1.44, 1.46. So that isn't that the medium household income in relation to what the average water bill is? That demonstrates?
It is, yeah. And so that MHI factor there, that 41,415 is the one that we calculated 2 years ago. And so that's comparing, that average monthly bill to average monthly income of a household.
And this is based on our system.
Based on your system.
Okay, and it seemed to me that when Denny and I went up to Richfield to do some, studies, is where you and I met. In fact, it was over a year ago. It was somewhere around 2.25% to 2.5% is what you have to have in that box in order to even qualify for a grant for USDA. In other words, until it gets to 2.25% to 2.5%, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it had to be that high before you even qualified for a grant at all. In other words, until it got that high, they didn't feel like that, it was a problem.
Yeah, and
is that accurate?
It is, and different funders kind of have different requirements there. But generally, a lot of funders look at that 2.5% is that affordability threshold. Now, each funder is going to be a little bit different. For example, State Revolving Fund looks at 1.75% of mean adjusted gross income. They have a different calculation. USDA, most states look at that 2.5% threshold.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah. And glad you remember the training we had last year. So this is, again, really where we're at today, and, seeing the need to increase revenue by 150,000, at a minimum, revenue needs to be increased, I think, by 135,000 in order to meet all the expenses you have currently and the terms of your loans. That additional 12 to 15,000 is how we would suggest funding your capital facilities program, which is a little bit higher than, say, what USDA or State Revolving Fund requires at a minimum. However, with that additional amount there, on last year's audit, you might have seen the requirement to set aside 5% of annual revenue to rebuild your existing reserves that have been drawn down. And so this 150,000 there will kind of create that buffer zone you need to meet the requirements of that audit finding, in addition to the different loan requirements. And so really trying to find a way to get there is kind of our next step here. And so this first suggestion here is increasing that residential base rate to $58 a month, so doubling that base rate. when you take a look at that, that's about half that theoretical base rate of $111, a little bit less. And so we apply that same percentage to the theoretical base rate for those 1 and 1.5 inch customers to find that equitable rate for all the customers involved, whether it's a 3/4 inch, 1 inch, or 1.5 inch. We want to make sure they're all paying their fair share as it relates to that theoretical base rate. And so with this first increase to $58 for residential customers, we incorporate that and then a 2% annual increase to help maintain, pace with inflation and, bring in the revenue needed over the next 5 years. And in this scenario, that's going to generate sufficient revenue over the next 5 years. And you might notice that asterisk there. That's assuming that, one, there's $60,000 in impact fees every year of those 5 years, and that this next year there's that $90,000 in impact fees specifically from the Gooseberry Mesa project. So as we look at that 5-year forecast here, you can see that cumulatively over 5 years, you have a net gain of $35,000.
2.26.
And, that 2021, you can see that the budget is balanced, you're contributing fully to reserves and have a net gain. That's really reliant on that $90,000 in impact fees from Gooseberry Mesa. Otherwise, you would be short on your reserve contributions by about 20,000. And so really what this is showing that is with, those rate suggestions is that over that 5-year period, you've contributed $258,000 to your reserves. This is maybe $35,000 more than strictly is needed, but in order to kind of create that buffer zone and make sure that you're bringing in the revenue to rebuild those restricted reserves that you've had to draw on in the past, I think that's a safe number to look for. And if this is rates such as these are implemented, really reviewing them closely each year to make sure that they're bringing in the revenue that's expected, and taking a deeper dive every 3 to 5 years to really readdress rates and raise or lower them as needed in order to make sure that, the system is bringing in the revenue that it needs to meet its different requirements. And so you'll see here, and actually I'll show you on the next slide, it's a little bit easier to see kind of what this does to the base rate and to those average customer bills. So like I mentioned previously, we haven't adjusted your tiers or your usage rates. Really, the tiers that you guys have put in are good tiers. It's very similar to what I suggest a lot of other systems use because they're realistic to what people are actually using in the community. So with this base rate increase, we're seeing this average bill here is increasing from about $48.50 a month to $78 a month in that first year. And that's the average residential customer. So it's a 60% increase, which is a big increase. There's no way to deny that. But it does, in relationship to affordability, still sit below that 2.5% threshold. It's getting much closer, but based on those standards, it is still affordable based on the median household income of the community. And really, it's going to bring in revenue that's needed to rebuild your reserves and continue to fund these different requirements that the system has. And so I'll move on to the kind of scenario 3 here, which is looking at maybe a more gradual increase of rates in order to, again, get to a point by year 5 where you're bringing in the revenue that the system needs to meet all these requirements. And so with this one, we're looking at kind of a 50% increase that first year. So bumping from $29 to $43.50, and then a similar increase for those 1 and 1.5 inch customers. Following that first year of a 50% increase, we're looking at a 25% increase in the second year, 15% in the third, 10 in the fourth, and 5 in the fifth. And so this as well will generate sufficient revenue, again with that asterisk, assuming that additional $90,000 in impact fees this next year. So The usage rates and tiers have not been adjusted at all for this. But what we're seeing here is that we're bringing in about the same cumulative revenue over 5 years. It's just spaced out a little bit differently. You might remember that in the previous scenario, in year one, you've contributed about $120,000 to your reserves in that first year. We've kind of dropped that down to 63,000. So a pretty significant change by reducing that first year increase. And you'll also notice that by year 5, that average bill is higher than year 5 in scenario 2, and we've crossed that threshold of affordability. So in alternative 2, by year 5, that affordability index was still showing 2.47%, but with this delayed implementation, it might be easier to handle up front, but by year 5, those monthly bills are more expensive because you really need to make up for a few more years of lost time. And so ultimately, the way things stand with the information that we've gathered is rates need to increase. I think we're all aware that rates need to go up in order to cover these expenses. And really, we're recommending looking at that alternative 2 here of doing that one-time large increase with, those smaller 2% increases in the following years to really help the system, keep pace with inflation. And, as I mentioned before, here's just kind of that comparison of alternatives 1, 2, and 3 with those current costs, how that impacts that customer bill, and really showing that alternative 3, those average monthly bills become higher than alternative 2 starting in year 3. For the same 5-year effect, it does put a larger long-term burden on your customers. So I guess, at this point, any questions right now? Or what are some of the thoughts here?
It's gonna be a super jolt. I don't have any illusions that we have all the money we need, but on the other hand, the $49 current. Anyway, I think the answer lies in the growth of Apple Valley, and if we stay stagnant, I don't know if we can maintain water prices in those ranges. It's a difficult situation to try to jump from 29 to 58. We could. I don't know, Marty. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, all of our surrounding communities are higher than us, and if you look at the dollars, I mean, there's 2 factors here. It's a challenge to bite off this kind of a base rate increase for many in the community, but the reality is we're going broke. We're taking in less money than we're spending every year. Our reserves are going down. Ben, I think, will probably do a presentation after this. Will kind of give us an idea how broke we're going. But literally, at the end of the year, we're not able to make our payment for the system. Now, if we go ahead and on the same track and we do go broke, the state's going to take us over. And what do you think they'll charge for the rates here? And they're not going to be cushy about how much they charge, and really that's the direction we're heading. Is I get where you're coming from, that this is a hard pill to swallow. Another couple of thoughts on it is that we're not doing anybody any favors, because if we had a higher base rate 2 and 3 or 4 years ago, we wouldn't be in this predicament today. And, you know, every year it seems like we're just hoping and praying that we get enough impact fees. And those impact fees now are going towards paying our payment by the skin of our teeth instead of buying new pipes, which can help connect more customers, which helps the financial status of the district. And, you know, that's the one thing that Denny and I learned when we went to this class is that the base rate should cover our day-to-day expenses. And that includes those payments. And then when you take in that, I mean, there's just so many things that we're letting go. Yeah, I mean, the painting the water tanks is a big deal. And like, okay, we're not going to clean the water tanks this year because we don't have any money. Yet it's on the calendar that we should be cleaning the water tanks, and we can't paint the water tanks because we don't have money because we haven't set anything aside. And every year that we let go by, our system is 1 year older, and that it continues to put us in a worse financial position the longer we do this. And hoping and praying that we get another impact fee from a big development, you know, maybe that happens, but we've counted on that for 3 years in a row, and we've missed the mark by 75% most years. And I mean, we got a real problem in that we're not charging enough money for what it costs to operate. And we can go back and, you know, beat up the model that Matt's put together as far as cost of replacement and things like that, and then see what it says. But, you know, I think Rod Mills was consulted on this, and so was Dell. And the other thing we got to always look for is that, I mean, today we have the luxury of Ross and Dale Harris doing some of this labor. And we don't know that that'll always be there as well. And we should also have that money prepared to, or on hand, just in case that's not the case as well. And so some of the numbers he has are probably very valid numbers that create this model. But anyway, the bottom line is we're not charging enough on what it takes to do business. We're less than some of the neighboring communities by a lot. And if we wanted to go borrow money to do that Canaan pipeline to connect it to the 1 million-gallon tank, there's no way we'd qualify. And, you know, we're holding ourselves back by not raising rates to something. That's the long and short of it. I could go on for a while, but.
Anybody else have any comments on that?
Well, I mean, the only other thing that I look at this is, yeah, I know we've lived off of impact fees, and we've scraped, and you give credit to Harold and the board before I even came on the scene, but they also had the foresight to get these water rights, the Canaan Springs and this stuff, and we are front loaded, right? And we cleaned up this system that wasn't even acceptable by the state, 8 years ago or whatever. And so we've front loaded a lot of this stuff, and we understand that. We're more like a startup business. And I think the state has been willing to go along with us without having all these reserves to this point because they knew our situation. And yeah, you know, we want to get out of it and all that, but I mean, are we gonna, as town, are we gonna approve some of these? If we got any legitimate things on the horizon, Harold? I mean, you know, as far as big projects and impact fees, I mean, are we just dreaming?
Well, I always have a laundry list. Ben answers the phone and he listens to most of the people first, but we have 90,000 on Gooseberry. Howard Town when that'll show up. Hoping for it this year, probably next year. Kaiser Youssef submitted some plans. Rod is doing a workup on the water needs for his project. He'll have substantial impact fees. There are some people out at Webb's. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, but there's nothing that I understand the part that the water and the impact fees have saved the day. But the base rate is the more solid income. You can anticipate and budget with it better than you can impact fee that may or may not come down the line. So I'm sure we've all lost some sleep and trying to figure our way out of this thing, but if the Hilton Hotel came in and built a hotel and we had servicing water and on and on and on, things would look a lot different. That's not likely to happen. So I think we're pretty well, I think we can trim our budget a little bit more, but we're still getting down into the tightening things to the point that they start to squeak and we do need a little more slack in this. I might have to ask you, Matt, did you have some thoughts on changing impact fees from what we have? Is that a topic that would be appropriate here too?
So I can't really speak to that. We didn't calculate any impact fees. So I'm not really able to speak to that. We looked simply at the rates.
Mayor, did you have something?
Yeah, I just was looking up a couple of things while we're going through this. So Laverkin's at $64, and they had to do a significant increase because they had pipes in the ground, and they were operating similar to us where they didn't plan ahead. They had to go out and borrow a bunch of money to do that, and to even qualify for the loan, they had to raise the rates up to $64 base rate, and Virgin's at 55, and I know Hilldale's even higher than this. The thing is what we're talking about raising it to is just not even what it probably should be to really operate the district in a safe and sound manner. It's just raising the rate enough to pay the bills.
Yeah.
It's not like we're not going to go out and buy all of us new pickups or something. You know, this is squeaking by time. And as you guys know, we've done our best as a town trying to cover some of the expenses on to help reduce those costs, but we're still, we can't do that anymore. And you guys agree with that, I know, but we have to do something here. We can't just keep bumping along, hoping and praying we get some more impact fees, because this is, we've done this 3 years in a row where we've been off by 75, 80% on our guests, hoping that someone's going to bring in a huge amount of money. And but we're at the point now that it's, I just think that it's, I'm not sure how else to put it, but the other thing I want to point out is that if we, based on this increase, we're looking at, I call it magi. It seemed like that's what I learned in Richfield. The median adjusted gross income in relation to our water bill is still under 2.5, and it takes 2.5 to even qualify for a USDA grant, which is what we were trying to do on that pipeline for the Canaan to Cedar Point. And so even if we decided that we want to move ahead on that project, we wouldn't likely qualify for a grant without having a rate of at least this as well. And it's, I think that's something we should be considering, is getting that pipeline there because of the gravity feed and so forth. But we won't even qualify for the grant because, I think someone mentioned that the state's been working with us and so forth. And there's a point too that the state can come in and say, well, you guys aren't charging enough. No wonder you can't make your payments. And so I think some scrutiny comes in there as well, that are we properly managing the money? And that doesn't mean that we're wasting money, because I know that we save money every place we can and we're careful, but we also probably are not charged as much as we should based on our expenses and even just trying to cover them.
Do you have any thoughts on it?
Well, is these figures based on the first year of $49 or something based on 2021 or 2020?
So these numbers are based on 2020. That's really, it's looking at that in our model, is year one increase would be going from 2019 to 2020. If it was delayed to 2021, we'd likely have to increase the base rate even more because, with the lower number of impact fees that you've seen so far this year, there's the risk that you might have to draw on reserves and have more ground to make up.
Well, it shows in year one, 49, and year two, this basically the same figure. And I was looking more at a staggered and look at like year one, 39, and year two, 49, and then go to 55, and then 60, then 65. That would put us over your threshold. So we should be able to build up a good reserve by years 4 and 5.
So on this chart right here, so the first one is current. So that's just looking at how customers' bills are increasing just based with, increasing consumption from those standby customers moving to regular consumers. Alternative 3 here is really that phased in process of if we increase the monthly bill to the 49.50 that first, or sorry, 43.50 that first year, the average bill would be 63.62 because that's incorporating those usage fees as well. And so with that lower increase, you wouldn't necessarily be able to come out at the end of 5 years in the black. With these suggestions of doubling the rate now, then adding 25%, 15, 10, and 5, you're still getting by with just really not too much to spare over a 5-year period.
I don't know what to say to that. I just think if we phase it in, I think over the 5 years, right now, if we double the fees for the town, I think we're gonna have a riot. I think we phase it in a little differently. They may buy it, but I think the first year, the 39 versus the 49, the second year you got the 49. The third year you actually have more, and the fourth and fifth year you have more. So that would balance out with the first year that you didn't raise it the almost 80%. That would make a difference. We'd actually be farther ahead in year 3 and 4 and 5, I think. The way I calculated anyway.
Yeah, and so, well, in looking at that, with a smaller increase in year 2, so in years 3, 4, and 5, that would have to be then a larger increase of, say, 25% over those several years instead of 10 or 15. So you could get there by year 5 and have that revenue that's needed. However, by year 5, your monthly bill will be much higher than it would be with just a one-time increase.
Mayor?
Yeah, I was going to say that any rate increase has to go before the public, and one of the options we have is in that public hearing, we're going to have a room full of people, and we can present these different scenarios and the state of the finances, and you can get some direct feedback to decide which way to go. We don't have to decide that today, but I want to also point out that this MHI that we're looking at here, is this on 2021? That's our current, is that right? And the 2.17 is if we raise the rate, right?
So all of these this is that alternative 3. So 2021 would be raising the rate to 43.50.
Okay. All right, that's alternative 3. Okay.
Yeah.
So Matt, you need to mute your headphones for a second. What I want to explain here is that we did this rate study that Matt worked so hard on, and what we have facing probably by next year, I'm not sure how long it takes, but this new census, and chances are the census is going to completely reset all of that, and that number is going to change now, where we can't even go and qualify for a grant money because our census is going to come higher than what Matt produced for us. And that census number is going to be our new norm. And all of a sudden that rate our percentage is going to drop down. And most of what we're seeing, that people that are pulling building permits, and they're all nicer homes. And the more and more the time goes by, it seems like more affluence is moving in, which is going to change that number that Matt was able to, today we get to use it, but that isn't going to always be. And a year from now, we're going to go out and apply for a loan with USDA, and we're going to have a 1.5% or 1.75% with an increase in the rate. And we're not going to qualify for grant money at this point. And it's something to keep in mind that we've got a small window on this, and unless we have a 2.5, MHI, MAGI, whatever they want to call it, number, we're not going to be qualifying for grant with USDA. So we also have to look at how bad do we want the pipeline, because it's going to take a rate increase to qualify for that pipeline. There's no way that they're going to come to us and say, we feel sorry for you. We'll give you a bunch of money for nothing. And so how important is it? And I just think that we need to, I'm suggesting that we schedule a public hearing. We know we got to do something, and we can have, 3 or 4 scenarios and lay it out. Let's talk to people. Everybody's going to blow up about it. I get that. Nobody likes to pay more, but Harold, you even mentioned to me that when we bought this system, we replaced all these pipes out here, like in front of my house, that if you look at the cost of the pipe today, 8 years later, it's twice as much money. Yet how much have we raised that base rate since we did that? And, that's something you guys have to keep in mind, is we go to the grocery store, in just about any place, everything costs more money. Our taxes are higher, and the cost of us providing water is no different. And it's if we have to use impact fee money to lay some pipe somewhere, we're paying twice as much money for it than we did 8 years ago.
And it's a point that maybe Matt could address, that Ross brought up. This water system is front end loaded. We have pipes running all over the place. And in normal circumstances, people can buy a lot. The pipe is in front of the lot already. We don't have any expense to hook them up whatsoever, actually maybe make $1 on it. So every time a house goes on, we're not incurring more and more expense. That's already built in. So as we go through the next 200 or 300 houses, chances are we're not going to spend a dime to get them in, but they're going to generate an impact fee plus a water flow. So our income should build without any additional debt being incurred. Do you follow what I'm talking about?
Right. Yeah, I agree with you on that, Harold. But at the same time, we can lower the rates too. We have 300 more connections. Now we can bring that rate right back down to $29.
Yeah, we'll all be dead by then. Our life expectancy is somewhere 30 to 60 days here, buddy.
Or we'll be broke if we don't do something.
So what would the next step be then? Schedule a public hearing?
Would the public hearing be appropriate for 30 days at the regular water meeting on the 4th of June? Would that be too far down the road to schedule that water meeting as a public hearing for the rates?
I don't know if you're asking me or Ben or what, but I think that we need to. I think we need to do something on it, and I don't know what time it takes to put this together. It doesn't have to be at a regular water board meeting, but you can decide that. You're the chairman. I just think we need to move that direction. And I hear Denny. I hear that maybe smaller is better, but I think that if they're looking at in 3 more years it's going to be twice as much. I don't know. We'll see what the public says. I've talked to a couple of people about that, and they kind of shrugged their shoulders that it costs more money to do business, so it just makes sense to them. And some people are not as upset about it as you might think. I know there's a lot of people that can't afford this.
I think we need to have a couple work meetings and put together some scenarios. Then when we have the public meeting, we can present those scenarios to them, say, this is what we're looking at, this is why we're looking at it that way. But just to say we're gonna raise it automatically to 49, I think we need to talk about that.
I agree with you, Denny. That's because it's and that's where having 3 or 4 scenarios would be helpful to forecast out where we're at. And I mean, the bottom line is if we Ben, are you going to go into some of this on your presentation, or
Yeah,
not Matt off, but is Matt finished, or?
Yeah, do you have anything more for us, Matt?
Yeah.
No, really, I'm glad that we're having this discussion here, and I think, yeah, cleaning up these scenarios now that you've seen them and have them ready to go for a public hearing is the best next step. Clearly we can all see that changes need to be made, and it's difficult to really rely on the hope that we'll have 300 more customers in the next few years, especially with the way things are trending right now with the pandemic and the possible economic consequences of that. It's hard to rely on those. And Marty, you did bring up a good point, is that water rates don't always have to be raised. If we look at this again in 3 years, 5 years, and see, hey, we're well off and we've brought in more revenue than we need, then rates can be lowered again.
But in the meantime,
I have,
it's smart to make sure that we have enough to pay the bills, and I think that's where we're missing it right now, is that we're in a little bit of a hole, and a little a bump right now is really needed of some kind, because we want to at least be able to cover our bills, and then if we get this bonus of some impact fees actually shows up, then gosh, that gives us. See, we've been pulling money out of reserves to pay some of the bills, and so if we had a little bit of impact fee money left over, that would help replenish some of the reserves on a faster basis, and then we can look at this, let's say in year 2, and instead of raising the rate again, because we took in this, magical, impact fee that we thought was going to show up, and it did show up, or that we were hoping would show up, and then all of a sudden our reserves are replenished, right then we can be saying, oh, next year we don't have to change the rate again because we recouped faster than we thought we might have. But at some point we've got to bite the bullet and be brave and at least raise this thing to help pay the bills, to make sure that we're not, it's just, I think it's reckless to have a hope and a prayer that we're going to get these reserves in through impact fees, because this COVID-19 thing, we've got a lot of stuff on the books, and you know what, it could change of where people are pumping the brakes, even though we think they're going forward. Could be that they're pumping the brakes on us. And
Matt, can we look at, like, maybe hone down some of those instead of using some of the national numbers? Is that something we could look at, and would it affect the amount of reserves that we need? Is that something, it would take us maybe a little work, but to me, I'd be interested in looking at that,
I think it's a great idea, Ross. Why don't you get with Matt on a Zoom meeting or something and go over some of that stuff? He can share on screen his raw data. When he was on screen with Ben and I, we were going over some of that, and I think you'd be excellent to include in that conversation. And I just, I think that he could tweak it, and then we can see where it is.
one other factor that I've considered as Matt built the model that didn't occur to me until he was actually going through the presentation is the cash contribution for future capital assets. So there's a table in the model that basically says if the capital asset exceeds a certain cost, the district will contribute a certain percentage of that project in cash. If I was a resident of Apple Valley and looking at that table, I would say that asset was originally acquired through 100% debt. So the future users, 40 years from now, when they're required to bond for the replacement of that asset, they should be bonding at the same rate that we did. Why are we subsidizing the future when we're paying 100%? So that may be something, that table may be something that we want to look at as well.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I agree. I think I think we need to get our stuff together and have a public hearing. My only concern, if we give the public 4 or 5 scenarios, does it turn into a free-for-all? Or do we have work meetings and say, we have looked at these different scenarios and this is what we've decided as the board? Because I think you can end up with fistfights out here in the parking lot over how you're even gonna structure it, personally.
I might suggest that, and see where everybody's at, that we have a work meeting next Thursday at 6 o'clock. And the Thursday after that, if we need it, and then roll into the first Thursday in June, which is the 4th of June, and have that as our public hearing. So we'd have time for 3 or 4 meetings and do that on a regular one. Marty, did you have something?
I was just going to suggest maybe Ross, if you and Matt can get together with Ben before that first work meeting, because it just takes Matt a little bit of time to go over some of these items, and if there's a way to squeeze that in, then we could see, because it's a spreadsheet, it'll help calculate this out, and maybe it will have some adjusted numbers by that first work meeting.
Okay, I'll make time to do it because I think this is important for us.
Does that sound good to everyone? 6 o'clock next Thursday?
Yeah.
We'll talk about whether it's Zoom or here or whatever. Well, appreciate it, Matt. If you have anything more, great. If not, we'll let you take the rest of the night off.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you,
Hey,
Matt.
Matt, what's your role typically in these rate studies in the future? I mean, do you participate in the public hearing, or is your job done at this point?
Yeah, so typically I participate in the public hearing, it'll likely be remote this time. I know RCAC, we still have travel restrictions that haven't been lifted for us yet. But yeah, I'm happy to provide, once we kind of hone down, say those, 2 or 3 scenarios, I'm happy to present on those. And, really, I'm here as a neutral third party. Whether you guys raise rates or don't raise rates, it doesn't impact me at all. And so I'm just here to tell the public what the numbers say.
Okay, well, we'll plan on you participating in this, and I'd like to participate with you and Ross when you get together. We'll get in touch with you through Ben in the next few days and get things ironed out before next Thursday a little bit.
Okay.
And
Hey, Matt, I just wanted to say thanks. I mean, this is, I'm just, when you guys see this spreadsheet this guy's done, it's pages and pages and pages of detailed calculations. And I appreciate all your hard work to help us come up with realistic numbers. I appreciate it a lot.
Oh, thanks. That's what we're here for.
All right.
thanks, man.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, thanks. And I'll stop sharing my screen here.
Okay. Does anybody have any comments they want to make before we move on? Yeah, we can clear our calendars out for Thursdays and work the rest of that through. Okay, we'll move on to item number 5, discussion and action regarding adoption of tentative budget setting date. We've already covered all of that with our Thursday work meetings. Number 6, discussion of possible action on road repair. Dale, you want to bring us up to speed on what we're
I
going
didn't
on?
bring that note in. I think I can remember off of my head. We got 756 square feet of patching that is the district's responsibility. There's 4 different patches that need to be done. I priced out asphalt just so I could get myself a little educated on how much this should actually be roundabout costing us. Asphalt could be delivered for $2 a square foot. So if you do the math on that, you're around $1,500 in cost is what it should be for our asphalt. And then I figure we should probably be maybe $1,000 at the very most to have it installed. So I've left a message with Richard Fisher on just telling him what my measurements are. I just haven't heard back from him. I haven't even seen him around town for a while, so I don't know if he's super busy. But that's the measurements and the numbers that I came up with what's the district's responsibility.
Okay, Marty?
Yeah, I've talked to Richard Fisher just recently. You know, we have that project over at the T intersection on the minor pipeline, and he's going to be removing that pipe and installing the proper, you know, what culverts, I guess, and well, the drain's right there. Anyway, he'll be closing that road down for a time. And when he's patching that, I thought it would be a good time that we all tag onto that, and we'll probably just use the dump truck, go over and get what he needs. And I'm going to have him help us with some other town patching that needs to happen as well. And so that'd be a good time that we tag on and haul some for the district as well, all at the same time. And so we can coordinate that with him, and maybe what we can do is have these cutouts ready, and then he's got a ride-on roller compactor now, and so he would be able to help us do those as well. So I think we just tag onto them, and we'll all just help out where we can, but we're going to do just that road plus all of them and just knock them all out. And just so we'll coordinate with them, and then we'll use a town dump truck to haul it all.
Okay, sounds good. They know if we keep in touch with him and.
Yeah.
And go, yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Okay, on the last discussion, policy and guidelines of contractor compliance with standards and actions and violations. Dale, that was something that you were concerned about?
Yeah, I did a little bit of research, got a hold of the state and looked for some advice on cleaning up who we have working on our pipes. I've had anywhere from electricians to people that have never done it before just because they have a license and are insured. I called the state and asking if there was something that I could do to be able to shore this up, to ask for more credentials from anybody that works on, including a private line extension, you know, kind of like what Graham's did. We have 110% say on who will be the contractor, even who does it for privately. We can make them be by our standards. And so just so you guys know, what I've been working on is that I'll get something put in place. But what I'm working on right now is to kind of come up with what other communities are actually expecting from people, and that is references, photos of stuff that they've done, so that we know that we've got somebody that's actually working on our lines, that has the experience and the aptitude to be working on our lines. Like I said, you know, we've had different people come. I've had one contractor that put in almost 500 feet of a main line extension, never called for an inspection. He let me know that he would put the pipe in the way he seen that it would go in right, and then he would give us a drawing afterwards. So this is going to clean these type of things up. Of the way that I see it is loose cannons coming in and trying to work on our system and creating a problem for us. This pipe went in uninspected, made him dig up part of it. I was promised pictures and never got pictures back. That's just one example. So this leaves the district hanging out there of the way the pipe was bedded, all of these different things. And so what I'm doing is working on that we can have in our policy that we are expecting anybody that works on our systems to actually have the aptitude to work on a culinary water system, not just any Joe Blow pipe, but on a culinary water system. We need to remember that this is what we put in our residents' bodies. And to have just somebody who just comes in and has just a license and insurance and meets those minimum standards of ours is leaving us wide open, is what it's leaving us wide open for, because we don't have people that are having experience. And I'm having to literally stand there. The hydrant that went in, I got told that these folks had experience with it. Well, just being there while they were putting the hydrant in, you hear the conversation. The guy talked to two guys that he knows that are buddies the night before on how to install a fire hydrant. I was there for 8 hours that day. The district's not getting paid for any of that. I can't leave those guys. They couldn't even put the fittings on right. I had to instruct them on even how to do fittings. They'd never even done mega lugs and knew that they were to break off.
Hey,
We
Dale,
still can't have this anymore.
Dale, isn't there like a license for underground, a certain, designation?
Yes, you're correct. Yep, yep, there's a license and then the state already has, the advice that I've got is that we already have a contractor's law essentially that enables us to do that. But it was recommended that we have something actually on our policy that we can say our policy is this. And then for bids for the district, to actually come up with a standard. Like with the springs. We can't just have any Joe Blow going up just because he meets the criteria we have in place to go work on our springs. We need somebody who's got experience taking care of those springs. And we need to treat our whole system that way. Even if it's just a fire hydrant, it still pertains to water quality. And if I'm gonna have to stand and actually watch these folks put in, we need to start coming up with a rate that the district's being paid, that I've got to stand there and guide people to go through all of this. So my suggestion is going to be choice A, is that they have a standard that they come in. I use the guys the prime guys that did the hydrant there next to your place, Marty, for I forget, Pledger. Those guys knew exactly what they were doing. As far as anybody that's come in and worked on our system, those guys are Cadillac. They knew everything that they were doing, and just like Marty has commented, they did a great pour around everything. I didn't have to hold these guys' hand. I didn't have to do anything. I had to wait for a phone call for inspections. I knew these guys knew what they were doing. Those are the type of people we need working on our system that have that experience.
Okay, well then, if you put something in writing and policy form, and the board can look at it, and if everybody's happy with it, we'll adopt it as policy, and that way then you can point it out and people know what's expected and give us some protection on that.
Done.
Okay, any comments from anybody? Anything we need to do? Okay, I motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Vote.
Aye.
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 Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hang on. Let me end this meeting really quick.